that, at this point, please feel free to have some refreshments during the program as well as after the program. Healthman is a privately owned healthcare consultancy, which has become an industry leader over the past 28 years. Comprising a team of experts and skilled professionals, they have been assisting over 4,500 private practices and practice groups throughout South Africa. What sets Healthman apart is its scientific, data-driven approach, which it uses to accurately determine private practice costs and to help to develop rational and logical codes and coding structures, which are then owned by the healthcare providers. Additionally, they act as a liaison with funders and administrators. From a healthcare provider perspective, this allows us to focus on what we were actually trained to do, which is to provide care for our patients. This while offering peace of mind regarding remuneration and financial security. From a sector perspective, this will ensure sustainability, quality, and cost effectiveness. We are joined today by Mr. Casper Venter, Managing Director of Healthman South Africa, and Mr. Steve Roos, responsible for practice valuation. Before I invite Mr. Venter to speak, I would like to invite Dr. Jürgen Hoffmann, CEO of Nppf, to address us. Dr. Hoffmann took over as CEO in May 2024, succeeding Dr. Dries Coetzee, a founding member and long-serving director and CEO. Dr. Coetzee is dearly beloved, and we wish him a happy retirement. Unfortunately, due to a passing in the family, Dr. Dries was unable to attend this evening. Dr. Jürgen Hoffmann has been championing our cause since taking over the CEO position, and we are most grateful for his leadership. Dr. Jürgen Hoffmann.
Thank you so much, Dr. Afshani. I really appreciate your kind words. Good evening, honored guests, esteemed colleagues, distinguished representatives of Namibia's healthcare sector. It is my privilege to welcome you to this important symposium. Tonight we gather healthcare practitioners, medical aid funds, fund administrators, NAMFISA representatives, and other key stakeholders to discuss some of the critical challenges facing Namibia's private healthcare funding system. Dr. Afshani already touched on numerous issues which I'm not going to repeat here, but I think we basically are stuck with some concepts that the crisis of the healthcare sector, which was predicted to last the healthcare sector, that is, for another 3 years, before we basically are in the doldrums and not going, with the medical aid funds will not be functional anymore. And one of the most crucial elements that was attributed to that was the FWA, fraud, waste and abuse construct, which the remedy to that process was to implement ICD-10 codes, and you probably followed the debate around that issue and the questioning of the efficacy of that kind of approach in really resolving our issues that we have. So we tried to look a little bit deeper into the system, and we also tried to identify tangible areas of engagement that we probably need to have on the map if you want to turn that tide around. And I think the most important factors that came out is that if you look at the various critical issues, then there are basically 5 of them and not only one. The future areas that we definitely are going to explore further in order to try to find some solutions to that is of course not going to be addressed by Casper and his team today, but I just want to give you the overarching impression of what we are facing and what actually is our responsibility and our obligation to address as a profession in order to make it more than 3 years and make it 300 years, hopefully. The one problem is that there's a stagnant membership base in terms of medical aid patients, and this stagnant membership base is aging, so it's getting older and older, and with cross subvention, you basically come to the point where those who carry the system actually absorb most of the resources they plow into it, and then it's a matter of time where you don't have enough money available for the funds to pay our services. And I think here's a crucial reform required, that we look at different models, and there is already Healthman has looked into certain kind of philosophies around that, which we're not going to expand today, but it's definitely something that we need to look at into the future, just to have a vertical growth and not a horizontal distribution of basically funds. And at the moment, the legislation doesn't allow for that. So there is some leeway in the new FIM bill, or the FIM Act, which still needs to be enacted to take care of that issue. Then exploring the feasibility of introducing consortiums or private blockchains to link healthcare practitioners, hospitals, pharmacies, and funds together. That's basically one system that is fraud resistant, that basically checks and balances the input on the one side. Where does it follow the chain, and where does it end at the moment, or at the end of it? So it would basically, if you talk about curbing fraud, then that model would be definitely much better, and it's ultimately linked to the regulator, so that would be Nppf, and they would be in the position to monitor compliance and detect irregularities in real time, significantly reducing fraud more effectively than the ICD-10 coding will ever do. Then we have the situation of the market being flooded by practitioners, and there we definitely have to look into the process that drives that flooding, so what is behind that. So there we also engaged in trying to see how is this oversupply addressed. So if you have more practitioners than you have patients, then it becomes a problem. And at one point, and during the time 2021 to 2023, we saw basically exponential growth in practice numbers being issued. So usually there was a 3.5, 3.8 increase over the previous 7 years, and now we suddenly sit with an increase of 500%. So somehow there is a disconnect there, and we just need to have the answers. Why is that happening? So these questions need to be answered, and we need to be properly informed. Why is that the case? So is there some kind of justification for that, or is it a matter of that suddenly all the quality controls are lapsing and everyone issues just registration certificates, which is also on record? So that's something that definitely needs to act. And then we need to support the enactment of the FIM Act, the implementation of relevant legislation, so that will take a lot of these fraud issues, which are also not really, when there are fraud issues, they are reported, they are not necessarily addressed, and with that you don't have any kind of recourse and really arresting these processes. So tonight we take the first step, and that will be the effort by Healthman. We have a long history with Healthman, specifically Mr. Casper Venter and Mr. Steve Roos, who have been involved in the previous cost study that's already 10 years ago in 2014. And they basically provided significant impetus again to this situation. So what we try to achieve is we want to have a certain benchmark, create a new benchmark for Namibia. What is our private or our basic costs at the moment for the different disciplines that are presented here, or basically on the NPPF representation list primarily. And from that on, we need the intention is to provide some kind of attachment to a coding model so that it can be used and that we can depart from something that is a little bit more recent. So the present model NAMAF has is the 2003 model, which already had 1,000 codes backlog in 2014. It has been, let's say, misappropriated, so it actually belongs to SAMA. The dentist complained that their model has been absorbed. So we want to have an authentic model that is basically practitioner-driven, practitioner-orientated, and then, of course, it doesn't mean that we stay with a model in itself. So then it needs to basically be linked up with all stakeholders, so that we basically have together, my words here, just to link up with what Healthman tries to endeavor as a leading consultancy. Healthman helps healthcare practitioners navigate the complexities of the system. Their vision is to create an environment where practitioners can thrive without unnecessary administrative burdens, fostering innovation, improving patient care, and ensuring the sustainability of funds. So I think we need to consider that we need to have a kind of holistic approach where all stakeholders need to sit around one table. So I think I don't want to go into the matter of the last 12 years that NPPF tried to facilitate that, which was not successful. So we have to focus on I want to close with that statement. Together we can build a brighter future for Namibian healthcare. Let the launch of this symposium mark the beginning of that journey, and that includes all those stakeholders represented in this venue here. So I want to hand over to Mr. Caspar Venter for the introduction, and he will basically just give you a rundown of what it entails to come to the point where we then can start making concrete progress into a direction where there's more equity in the whole process. We don't see it at the moment. We see a lot of clinical interventions from a funding perspective, and we are not very comfortable with the kind of dynamics in the system. So I think the funders should do the funding side, and the healthcare professions should be the clinical side, and we should separate those things, and we should work together to make it work for all of us. So thank you very much for all being here and for all taking your precious time to attend that session, and hopefully it will be the beginning of something great. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. Let's see if the presentation comes up. It's been quite great to come to Namibia. I've been here a few times, and we hope technology works. On the back. So first of all, as you've heard, we've been here before. We've been through these issues in South Africa. Our last really big cost study in South Africa we did with the South African Medical Association, which was a good cooperation, I think, to do it jointly. We did the work, and we had some actuaries involved as well. The result, of course, of that was the medical schemes didn't accept it, the regulator didn't accept it, so we went to court. We went to the High Court, and That case was won, and the result of that was that schemes ultimately increased tariffs, and the most important, most schemes, in fact all schemes now have multiple tariff structures. So in the discovery environment, we'll probably have about 10 type of tariffs for each type of a contract that we enter into. For that, we need designated service providers, and that you might already have in Namibia, but that ultimately will come. You agree to a price, and the prices are good. I always tell the doctors, if you can't survive on that price, you're just not going to make it in any case. So to look at the team that we have, and the one aspect that I'm not going to deal with is what Mardi deals with, our director there in the middle, is the fraud, waste and abuse. And I think one has to distinguish between fraud, waste and abuse. The fraud's a difficult one, and we invariably don't find the straight fraudulent people approaching us for issues because they know what the outcome will be. So after over 600 investigations we've done, probably over 600 came out with a zero repayment. We also had the allegations that in South Africa it's racial based. So we did go and present, and there was a commission, and the outcome was, of course, it's spread all over all schemes, over all provinces. It's not province related, and it's not race related. The waste and abuse a bit more difficult. There sometimes we have to repay. The practice has to repay, but we negotiate a 3-year repayment period, and of course, as in life, there's always a discount. You don't buy anything if there isn't a discount, so that works quite well. And there was a specific Section 59 inquiry into it, and that's dead now. So we basically work well with the medical scheme fraud divisions. They, in fact, come and braai at our office, so we're good friends because we have to work together. And I think that's the one thing that I want to stress right from the beginning. Our relation with schemes and administrators is good, because without them, us and the doctors, you have no industry. And if I talk about doctors, it's healthcare practitioners. So in addition to our 4,500 or probably now 5,000 medical doctors, we also have probably 1,500 to 2,000 allied health professionals, of which the biggest grouping is optometry. And in optometry, we do different type of projects with the scheme itself. So that's our team. It's myself, Ernst Ackerman, who is based in the Cape. He's an attorney. I'm an accountant. Mardi, who's trained in the psychology area, and she's been with us many years, and she also spent probably about 10 years working in the GP environment. So she understands the GPs quite well, and we do have a GP group. But in South Africa, we also have IPAF, which is a major GP grouping in South Africa, and we do cooperate with them, because at the end of the day, all the codes is driven by one central mechanism, and all the pricing and so on. So we work quite well. Piet, who's been with us since day one, an accountant, and our latest addition as a director and also working in our office is Julian Botha. Now, the interesting thing of him is he spent probably about 10 years as the medical advisor to SAMA. So that helps us when any legal issues come up. We don't have to run to court every time. Julian has been around many years, and he will write us if the Council for Medical Scheme writes a circular as an example. Julian will give us an opinion on it, and we take that further, and we try to avoid the courts if possible. But it's nice to go to court as well. That I don't mind. And one of our competitors said, "Well, we'll take you to the High Court." I said, "Well, that's fine. Let's do that." So that's basically how we split network support and administration. So we've got a team of ladies and one guy, Manny, that's permanently in the office, some in Joburg, some in Cape Town, some in Montague. And they're permanently available if a doctor or a practitioner phones in with a query. We have a media information, so we have a permanent journalist, Marietta, who works for Nationale Pers. And she does all our writing, and Carl assists with that. And what I forgot to say right at the start is please ask questions at any time. And I won't say in any language, but you can ask in Afrikaans. But bitte nicht in Deutsch. Ich verstehe nicht so gut. So. But you can make signs and so on. people who manage our facilities and our consultants. Our latest consultant's Carl Peterser, who's a GP anaesthetist as well, which is a bit of a mix. So he's joined us. His father is an orthopedic surgeon, and for Julia's sake, he was also at Helpmekaar, and his grandfather is also orthopedic surgeon. And then we have Brenda, who's a coding specialist, and you might want to make use of her. She's permanently working for us and Nppf, and she's had about 30 years of coding experience. So nothing escapes her, and we work very well together with the South African Medical Association on coding. Whatever we do in coding, they publish the coding, and we assist them. We bring the new codes to them. We do all the studies. So that's a relationship that works very well. Healthcare is very controversial in South Africa, so that's just sort of a one-month media summary. There's something in the media every day on healthcare, someone complaining, so we have to deal with it. Those are the affiliated groups to Healthman and to Nppf. So we've got the South African Private Practitioners Forum, and ultimately they're the legal entity through which we go to court. That's very important. So most of them is litigious of nature, and we look after the group's operational issues, and it works well, and I didn't put all of them on it. The Izandla one is a new one. That's a physiotherapy group, and we have Isoleso, that's the 1,000 optometrists. So there's two competing networks in South Africa, PPN and Isoleso, and we compete, and that's fine. All the others are either driven by an association or by a management group. It depends on their choice. Some of them, the associations, aren't very competent, and it's driven by a management group, and that's the way we work. So if you look at the typical structure of how it works, is we have an association, if there is one, that's very active, and most of them they are. The ophthalmologists very active, the ENTs, the psychiatrists, and so on. They then have a private sector arm and a public sector arm. So we do have a combination of the private and the public sector. That's very important. And if I another step back to one of the comments, either from Jürgen or our chair here for the day, is many of our South African doctors now move to Namibia. They tend to go to obviously Swakop and Walvis, and we've had two that moved recently, an orthopod and a psychiatrist. Also, Julia, at Helpmekaar. So that's a common denominator with doctors at Help. And then we have the society CPD congresses, very important in South Africa. If you're not a member, you cannot attend. If you cannot attend, you do not get CPD points. And to step another one back, ICD-10 is not as important in South Africa. It's on the accounts, but no one bothers about it, and now we're moving to ICD-11. So it's strange. So we've got Healthman and Nppf as the organization that leads everything, and then we use a lot of consultants that's knowledgeable in the industry to assist us with matters, and that's all on a consulting basis. So we have Inside Actuaries, that's probably the biggest private actuarial firm in South Africa. They do a lot of work for us, and the one thing that they do annually is a tariff inflator, which we then use when we go to the medical schemes. So it tracks inflation, salary increases, equipment increases, all of that, and then a medical aid increases over the year, and we negotiate on that. Okay, that's what the actuary says. It's a 20-year history, so it's Active E2 is our IT supplier. We work with MediSwitch, that's here today, and HealthBridge, and MediSwitch is going to be our supplier of data. We already have a contract in South Africa with the holding company, which is Altron, which you might have heard. Weber Wenzel is if we go to serious litigation. So currently we have the National Health Insurance. So we've been on that for a year, and our legal bill is about 3.5 million. And the doctors have to contribute every year. So we take about, it's in fact 1,000 rand per doctor or per medical practitioner to pay the legal bills. Weber Wenzel are very good, but extremely expensive. Yes. That's why attorneys have a good living, I guess. Then LCB Clinic Consultants. LCB is legal background, but she understands healthcare very well. She works from Hermanus, and then Integritas does most of our accounting and auditing for all the groups. And they understand doctors. They do a lot of doctors as well. So this is the typical structure of how we see it in South Africa. What are the pillars of private practice? So it must start with the practitioner. They then tie into their own practice. That's why we're doing practice costs and assisting them with the coding and impact studies and all of that. Then the profession, very good. And in one or two cases, the profession doesn't work very well. And one good example is pediatricians. Their society and the management commercial side doesn't work together. They don't cooperate really, but it doesn't matter. Then the medical scheme environment, you must work well together, and we do. And then it's the regulatory environment, and that's where the litigation is. Unfortunately, with the regulators in South Africa, we do have differences. Occasionally we agree, in the majority of cases we disagree, and it does end up in court, or we debate it, or we get a legal opinion. And the final would be, and I'm going to mention one or two of them, where we actually go to court, which is a bit expensive. So if you look at the environment itself, it's NHI, which we'll deal with a bit. It's physician employment, doctor employment, practitioner employment is now becoming very relevant in South Africa, and that's the employment of healthcare practitioners by the hospital system, which has never been allowed, but it's on the books now. You know, that's coming, so we're waiting. See, Life Esidimeni was one of those disasters in South Africa where the regulator moved psychiatric patients out of psychiatric care into private care. And 144 of those patients died. And that investigation is now 5 years later, and no one's taken responsibility for that decision, you know, which is quite sad. We have a Office of Health Standard Compliance. Now, their role is to inspect the public sector hospitals, the quality there, and I don't have the numbers, but about 80% of all public sector hospitals in South Africa fail that test. So you cannot have national health if the quality of care that you will get in the public sector is not up to standard. You know, that's a reality. So I live in Joburg. There we have the old Joburg Gen, which has now got another name. 1,000 of its 2,000 beds are empty, you know. So how can you have a health system where beds are empty and there's this massive demand? You know, so that's quite important. And then we have the Council for Medical Schemes that does play an important role, and we do get along with them. They issue circulars, probably about 60, 70 circulars per year, dealing with a variety of matters. One of them is dealt with tariffs, and that's one we're going to litigate, and I'll show you now what they did on that one. Not very clever, but they skipped the court system and used the gap in it to create another option, but we will see what happens with that. Then national health insurance, as you know, is top of the mind in South Africa. You know, and I always tell the doctors, don't stress. Well, I know for one, I'll be dead long before it ever comes. It was gazetted the very first time in South Africa in 1927. So in 2 years, we're going to have a centenary function about that. It's still not there. Then it revived again. It was stopped totally in 1948. Then it revived again in Polokwane with a political debate with the ANC in 2007. And we're now 18 years later, and we still haven't progressed. We've gone to court, yes. But, you know, so that's going to hurt a bit, but we'll work on it. Then, of course, the big issue we have in South Africa, and you might be aware of it, is the fraud in corruption in the public sector and tenders, you know, that goes to no one. It goes to dormant companies, you know, and people benefit out of it. The big one that came to the news was the Eskom process, and Andre de Ruyter. And what's, okay, first of all, they threatened to kill him and his wife and his children, so he left the country. And what's interesting, in the last month, the government's now starting to investigate each of the allegations that he made, because there's something behind it, and someone is losing, and not having power as we've had. Shutdowns on a regular basis is not a good thing. So if that also comes to the healthcare sector, you will guess what's going to happen. You'll go to a public sector hospital, and the patient will escape there, you know, just saying, well, they're okay. You know, I'll probably do a lot better. Not in the hospital. That's an NHI sort of slide that we've had since 2010. You know, and that's the reality of it. Lots of money will go into the system. They're talking about R1 trillion that will go into the NHI system. And what will come to the hospitals, the practitioners and so on in the end is very little. It's going to be wasted because you're going to have those middlemen in it that's going to earn a lot of money. And forget me if I'm critical, but it's reality. That's what we deal with. So if I look at some of the regulatory and other challenges, and believe me, Namibia has the same or will have the same, and I know you have other regulatory structure which Nppf is working very hard on, and perhaps future visits we can talk a bit about those, and I can deal with Nppf on it, but the same. So some of the discussion points on this is we have about 9.3 million medical scheme members. It's growing by about 0.1% per year, so it's not an expanding market because it's pretty much the employed market. And one of the changes that could come quite soon is that if you're employed, you have to belong to a medical scheme. That's it. Because you do have the money, and often it's the young people that don't belong to medical schemes because they reckon they can afford it, and they're not going to get ill, but they can get into a car crash, or whatever else catastrophe could hit you, so that's a reality. We also had a competition commission health market inquiry. That's about 6 years now. I'm going to point to some of those issues. No progress. I testified at your competition commission now, and I can't remember the year, 2012 or 2014. NAMAF was there, but they refused to say a word. And that's the reality. And Johan van Zyl was also there, also didn't say a word. NHI, we've spoken about the PMB review, Council for Medical Schemes. We have PMBs. It's a prescribed minimum benefit, and a scheme has to pay that. They have no choice. There's 29 sort of primary PMBs that schemes have to pay. And one of it's an emergency medical situation. If you're in a bad disaster, you go to the closest hospital, and the ambulances are forced to take you to the closest hospital. They have no choice. And you will stay in that hospital even if you're not insured patient. They won't take you to Joburg General. They first have to take you to a private hospital. You have to be stabilized and released before you can go to another hospital. So that's a very important one. And then in our case, our statutory bodies, including somewhat to a certain extent, is dysfunctional organizations. And then we had CMS and that Circular 66 that I'll talk about. Now, with SAMA, I think the good point is that most specialists have left SAMA. They're no longer members. The Radiology Society is still, so Richard Tuft is. And the main purpose is to know what's happening there and come and tell us what's happening. But it's pretty much dysfunctional, except the coding division. The coding division actually does work, and we work with them on a weekly, daily basis. So that's quite nice. The sustainability of medical schemes in South Africa, all that I can say, they make huge profits, and they hate the word profits. They say it's surpluses. Yes, a surplus is a profit. I'm an accountant. Income less expenses is a profit. It doesn't matter which way you look at it. And what's interesting now, our Council for Medical Schemes hasn't released the final report for 2023. We're now in 2025, and I think the reason for that is they've released bits and pieces. They don't want to show that bottom line, which is the balance sheets and what's the accumulated surpluses in the system. We can't fight about it. They've said end of March they'll release it, and I'll send some of that to you. And their reason is they've had IT problems. Now, if you've had IT problems for 5-6 months, you really have a problem. Everything, IT can get solved very quickly. Cost of running a practice, and that's part of what the study is going to be, it increases by CPI plus. It's not CPI. So in South Africa, we talk about CPI 2.5 or 3%. That's a lie, because it's a very focused CPI. It's not a focus to an industry, nor is it focused to your cost of living as an individual. It's a general index, and everything else in the country works at CPI plus. Then the last thing that's going to happen, and I think that's going to hit Namibia as well, and that was part of the agenda, is alternative reimbursement systems. It's the value-add products, it's the global fees, it's capitation, and so on. And we'll briefly look at some of them that's already in place or in the process, especially in the surgical space of being implemented. Circular 66 of 21 over they took a gap in what the court decided in our court case 2010 to 2012, and the court set aside everything that was done from 2007 onwards, assuming that who will fall back to an older version of tariffs. And that's what the Council for Medical Schemes did. They fell back to 2006 as a legal procedural coding system. And they will use that to adjudicate complaints. And the complaints can be fraud, waste and abuse as well. We are in discussions with them. And they have now said that, well, they will look at new codes as and when they implement it. But that's not the right way, because you could always run into a problem. So we might go back and have that set aside. The Competition Commission set aside everything between 2004 and 2006. And then the Council for Medical Schemes published the list of codes and tariffs, and that's why we went to court. But the judge only set aside 2007 onwards, taking that as the legal, sort of a logical decision, not to fall back in history and so on. So the groups in SAMA issue new codes annually at this stage. It's a very good cooperation. There's a specific format. We must also be able to prove the cost of that and the financial impact. So invariably, when you go to a scheme, they will say, well, we can't afford it. But that's not the issue. It's a new procedure. It's new equipment. You have to adjust. So we definitely do that. I've already spoken about Circular 66. And there's no prospects of our minister publishing anything new. There's a zero prospect, So that part of the legal system or the statutory system, we're just ignoring at this stage. Okay, if we look at what's happened in the other field is there was a government gazette published with a certificate of need. And the certificate of need sort of says the government can decide where a doctor can practice or where a hospital can be or where any institution is. Now that's going to chase people away, so we actually went between Solidarity, SAPAF, SAIPA and 4 others. We brought an application to the High Court to have certain sections set aside. They appealed to it, and ultimately the Constitutional Court in South Africa set it aside. So now we're waiting for, okay, what's going to happen next. So it could be in, I guess, Namibia, you're less exposed to it, but it might be that there's a, who wants to open up in Windhoek. No, too many doctors, you can't go somewhere else. That's the reality of that type of situation. Ethical rules, the draft proposals, that's been published for comment, and it's okay, I don't want to be on the camera, but sorry. So the draft changes, it will permit subject to certain criteria being met, but one of the important things of that is multidisciplinary practices and commensurate fee sharing of it. So if one sort of thinks about what is multidisciplinary ENTs and audiologists, automatic, they work together, they refer between each other, but perhaps they should join in a multidisciplinary practice, which our coding system does not yet allow, but we're going to work towards it. But you'll have 2 coding systems for a claim. And then you can just imagine what happens at the administrator. It will be chaos. And at the scheme, lots of investigations into it. And then ophthalmology and optometry, very similar. And it's very close to each other. They refer to each other, they work together, but perhaps join up in a practice, So those are the things that could happen in the ethical rules. The Competition Commission and the Health Market Inquiry, very similar to here, nothing happens. So if we look at what they had, 5 or 6 main recommendations to establish a supply-side regulator of healthcare services. How many doctors, how many hospitals should there be? That's very difficult to decide, because it's a profession you choose. Now we're 5 years later and nothing has happened on that. We have a tariff setting body to be instituted by the supply side regulator as well. And nothing is ongoing. We've had the court case and no progress to date. Now the schemes have multiple rates and SAPAF and SAMA cooperates on that issue. And that's very important on your side. We motivate any new codes. We have a look at the impact studies of it, what impact will it have, and so on. And that works very, very well. A coding authority, well, at this stage it's SAPAF and SACHI. So our new organization that's been registered for a while is SACHI. Now that stands for the South African Classification of Healthcare Issues and Coding and so on. And it will work on all the work building up to a coding change, plus the impact, plus looking at what happened in America and Australia and so on. So that's due to kick off now January this year. So we're working that, but that work's currently being done by the groups in any case, but we need a legal entity to do it, so that if we have to go to court, you need an entity that can actually go to court. You know, otherwise it will be SAPAF. The supply side regulated to take over PCNS, well, that's not, hasn't happened, and I doubt whether it will ever happen. We unfortunately do have some fraud in the PCNS numbers with people with multiple practice numbers, you know, and that does lead to fraud, but most of them are picked up. The HPCSA to change the regulation to be more competition friendly. Well, everything that happens in the free market must be competition friendly. You know, you must be able to compete. Now, the one thing that you can't do, and if you get together and collude on tariffs and pricing, it can be seen as collusion. But in South Africa, fortunately, that doesn't happen. In the US, you can forget to have one organization or association that really represents everybody. You know, that doesn't work. The BHF complained, the BHF, our Board of Healthcare Funders, did lodge a complaint against Healthman at the Competition Commission for us actually publishing tariffs. So if you go to our website, you will see there's a section on tariffs, and we publish all the tariffs, all the schemes, all their tariffs per discipline. And our argument, just Ernst and I went to see the Competition Commission, we didn't even bother to use the attorneys, was it's in the interest of the public to understand what is out there. What are the tariffs? What do various schemes offer? Whether that will ever happen here, I don't know. But in South Africa, that's not an issue anymore. Now, this is, I guess, the big question, you know, where are the billions of rands? Who does it belong to? And that's old Donald sort of having a go at it. And I think in our world, many people have a go at it. So if I look at the schemes itself, and I think it is a bit different in Namibia. Our schemes have to have a statutory reserve of 25%. I'm sure you have it as well. But most of the schemes are way above it. Some of them are up to 50%, and Discovery probably about at 38%. So if I look at our 5 top open schemes and the 5 top restricted schemes, that's either restricted because of employer or of government and so on. But you'll see that GEMS, our government employee medical scheme, is the second biggest scheme in South Africa, and they're sitting with 23.9 billion rand in reserves. So being a statutory government scheme, that's not so bad. Discovery is sitting at 28 billion, and if I look at, so only those 10 schemes sit with 82 billion rand in reserves funds, which is paid by the patient, and one understands the schemes argue that it's actually the patient's money. But what happens if you die? No one inherits it. What happens if you move to another scheme? You don't transfer your bit to it. So for all practical and reality purposes, it's within the scheme. It's theirs. You know, they spend it, and the administrators charge their normal management fees. Our administrators could charge anything from 8% of premiums up to about 13%, and at the highest level is Discovery. You know, they're still the biggest. That's why they're doing quite well. Very interesting that Polmed, our police medical scheme, also sits with 8.6 billion rand in reserves. A lot of fraud in that area, especially in audiology, you know, where investigator goes to a policeman, he hasn't got his hearing aid on anymore, so why don't you wear your hearing aid? Now my hearing has improved. But, you know, then it's a 50,000 rand hearing aid that's not been used, but that being paid for by the scheme. And the system that we have in South Africa is runners. So you have 3 runners in the system. One is a runner that goes and finds a patient and a medical practitioner that's willing to commit the fraud, and they split the proceeds, the claim, 3 ways. So that does happen. They're not often caught, and people don't prosecute that. Another sort of shortfall in this system is that where a practitioner has committed fraud and has to pay back to the scheme, let's say 100% of the fraud, the scheme will not lodge a complaint at the Health Professions Council because they say they'd rather have the money back. Now, that's not going to make an end to fraud, unfortunately, and that's really a different session. So if we just look at Discovery Health itself, they present 58% of the market. Now, if that's not market dominance, I wouldn't know. And those are the schemes that they administer. The rich one in there is probably LA Health, which is a municipal scheme. And they make a lot of money because it includes Cape Town City and Joburg City. Out of that, you definitely do make some money. And then BankMed, and you will see what their reserves look like. Very healthy, way above the 25%, initially a few years back below, but then slowly it crept up. If we look at what does the income statement look like, and that was the 22 numbers because we haven't received the 23 numbers. Contributions, 232 billion. And then the healthcare expenditure, so those are the claims, 198. And then the non-healthcare expenditure, 18 billion, that goes to the administrators. Now, the interesting thing is that a change came in about 2 years back, where the regulator decided that managed care expenses, so if you have a managed care program, it's actually a healthcare expense and not an administration expense. Now, in my heart, there's no logic in that. It's an administration, it goes to the administrator to run their program, and it's not a healthcare expense, which it now is. And that's a few billion rand as well. Surplus 1 year, 12 billion, then 2.3 billion, but the reason for that is that the contributions only went up about 3%. Then you will have a less of a profit. And I think that was to hide the big profits that they actually made. But we'll see in future. Our split, and I guess it's very much the same, just over 50%, so 35% goes to hospitals, 77 billion, and then medicines. Together that makes up just over 50%. Radiology and pathology, big suppliers, that also a big number. And that ultimately makes up the expenditure. So you will see our GPs makes up 11.5 billion rand, and that's 5%. So it's still a substantial. Our GPs are not doing as well as specialists. That's very obvious. But the problem is that in our environment, they refer a lot of work. They don't actually do the work. They refer it, except in the platteland, where they actually have to do it. But what's happening in the platteland, in the country districts, the GPs are getting less and less and less. Where you had 2-3 GPs in a certain small town, you have now 1 GP that does 4 towns, and rotates. So he's only in town 1 day a week. So what happens with the farmers? They go to Bloemfontein. That's the reality. Now there's a highway. In the old days, when my wife grew up on the farm, they had to go from Tromsburg to Reddersburg to Edenburg. Now you just get on the highway, and just over an hour you're in Bloemfontein, and you go to expensive places there. So if we look at the total payout to the medical schemes, and that's now 23 data that we've been able to squeeze out of the Council for Medical Schemes. The general practitioners, 12.2 billion. The specialists, all specialists, 66 billion. And then the allied professions. So the allied professions is slowly getting bigger and bigger. And that's the whole range of allied specialists, allied healthcare practitioners, of which the biggest one is, optometry. They take about 2.3 billion rand in optometry. So that makes up the total expenditure, which is a substantial number. So very soon that number will be over 250 billion to 300 billion. Now, the one thing, if we look at the reserves, which is 130 or 140 billion currently as we stand, that's a guess, but I'm sure it's good enough. The government is looking at that to take it and put it into the NHI fund as a start, as a kick-off, you know. So that's what the idea of that is. So the building blocks for good medical practitioners, financial management, very important. You know, you tend to forget it, and that's especially in the accounting area, who manage how long is it audited, do you have tax queries, and so on. Tariffs, pricing, and coding equals revenue. So that's the most important thing. You've got to get your coding right, you've got to get your tariffs right, and for that you've got to get the relative value unit. So that's the time aspect, or called the relative value unit. Right, and the reference for South Africa for especially procedures is look at what's happening in the US and multiply it by 10, and that's a number in South Africa. Our doctors feel that the multiple should be about 12.8, but everybody sticks with 10, and the scheme's actually accepted because it's been consistent for about 15 years. Then you've got to understand your own cost. What does it cost to run a practice? And that's why we're going to do this current study. Regular patient and medical scheme profiles. I don't think we're there yet. The schemes in South Africa, they don't have a choice. We pick it up. We bring, which you don't have, access to information, application against the Council for Medical Schemes, and they have to release what's called a Section 37 report to us, which is about a 130-page document with data of that scheme, each and every option, and that's very, very useful. But once again, they've got technical problems, so they haven't released it. But you pay for a Access to Information Act against anyone. You pay 75 Rand and they have to give it to you, you know, so that works well. Otherwise, we litigate. Staffing of the practice and HR and so on. Ideal IT, very complex, and the IT is your own practice management system. And then it's the switching or not. Paper claims, as please, it's old. You know, if you don't get paid in time for a paper claim, then don't blame yourself. What we always say is, he's got the data is king. You know, if you have the right data, your cost, your codes, and how much is charged, then you'll be in charge. And that's what we're looking for. So a very interesting one is, in South Africa, 350 of 2,500 codes makes up 92.5% of all claims. So doctors know what's going to be paid, or other healthcare practitioners, and they charge that. Whether it's the right code or not, well, that leads to often the fraud and so on, but that's still currently, and it's been that position for quite a few years. And then you have 2,000 codes that only 7.5% of claims. Now, that doesn't make sense. It also does not represent radiology and pathology. We don't get their claims data, and we don't specialize in radiology and pathology. They've got very good structures with the Radiology Society and the National Pathology Group that regulates that market. And they work very close together, and it works quite well, especially pathology. And pathology, I guess we have 3 of the path labs in South Africa. That's 90% of the market, you know, and that works. And Path Lancet and the one situated in Bloem. So that's how it works. We then split up the codes per discipline, how many codes falls within that 350 codes. And at the bottom, you will see the consultations and E&M codes and the GPs and physicians. Physicians basically charge consults, perhaps some modifiers and so on. So together, between yourselves and the physicians, we have 23 codes to actually look at and focus on. A big part of it's the consults, and I'm not sure what our Namibia is, but in South Africa, the schemes do not pay differently for a 15, 30, 45-minute consult. They pay the same. So one set of tariffs for the surgical disciplines and one set of tariffs, double the tariff for the consulting disciplines. You know, except neurosurgeons is different. There they will also pay double. And we're fighting that. And the problem that you then have is the doctor will always charge the shortest one, 0190, which you also have 0190, 9192. We now have a 0193. I'm not sure if you have a 0193. So that's a lengthy consult which they will start paying now. But what's interesting, then you must charge a 0192 and a 0193 to indicate it's a long one. And the doctors default to a 0190 and a 0193, and the schemes will say, that's fraudulent. How can you charge a lengthy consult, but you actually only saw the patient 15 minutes, you know? So that creates issues, but that's what we're working with. The analysis itself, so it's the consults, modifiers, and ICU ventilation. That's really the big ones that we work. Consults will always be the biggest one, and that's the GPs and each and every specialist. You know, so in our allied health groups, we do have separate coding sets, and there's no issues, but they actually don't update it, you know. They accept what happened years back, and they just plod along, you know, which is quite sad that happens. So this is how we would split it when we give you reports. Each and every color has a basic discipline. So you will see that the consults there at the end of the day makes up the biggest issue, and that when split that 250 again. So the consults, even in the specialist environment, will be the biggest proportion, and then you'll see each and every discipline. So if we put the GP consults with that, then that block will change totally, and 50% will be consults, and our specialist code will be less and less. So very difficult to put on a pie chart. You know, you'll have to do it some other way, but we understand what it is. What we do is, and just to show you, is the collection of data that we now do on an annual basis. So Discovery and its administered schemes, we've been getting data, claims data, for 10 years now. So we have a 10-year history on this, so split between the consults, the modifiers, materials, and procedures. But they do not tell us which scheme it is, or which patient, or which area. So our new move, what we're going to do with MediSwitch Eltron in South Africa, we will get that data at a practice level, a regional level, at a plan level, but the practice will always be anonymized because of the POPI Act. We now have a protection of personal information, which people also abuse, say, no, it's POPI, you can't have it. But we bring the right applications to make sure, you know, whether it's a BankMed option 1, that's not protected. But the practitioner's name, of course, that's protected. And we have it, so we have the code, we have the RVUs, we have the frequencies, and then the number of practices that charge it, the average per practice, the average per claim, and then the total claims and percentages and the cumulative. You know, so that's ultimately what we intend to have with you as well, so that you have a history and you can compare it year to year. And if a medical scheme gives you a tough time, you take this to them. Discovery fights with us and say, well, it will have a large impact. We look at the code and we say, okay, what's the equivalent code? You know, and use that. Now, unfortunately, often new codes is not paid, and then we have a modifier or add-on, which I call a Rule J, which means you charge another code and just put in your billing Rule J. So that comes through as an equivalent. But that's not the right way, because you could have a dozen Rule Js, and each and every is a different procedure. You know, so that's not really logic. You know, and that's sort of how we then we look at it per discipline, each and every of the codes that we can agree, and we can do that with yourselves as well. If we look at the medical practitioner, success is the best one at the top. So first of all, financial management, and that's where the practice cost comes in, and tax, tariffs, pricing, and the coding, which generates the revenue. Understand your own practice, correct staffing in the practice. And you know, it's I know people employ wives and they employ family and they employ so on. So that's your own choice. What ideal, we've spoken about that. And then if we look at practice costs, so this is typical how a practice cost study summary will look at the end of the day. So this is the ENT one. So we've added the groups of cost, personnel, IT, financial management, and so on. And it gives you a comparison, so we can now compare that to all surgical disciplines. Is the ENT practice different or not? You know, and we can do that with each and every discipline. We add the inflator, and ultimately we get with what we believe a correct tariff would be in 2025, and that's what we publish on our website is what we believe the correct tariff for a medical discipline would be. And that's what we got taken to the Competition Commission, and we dealt with it. It is, the public wants to know, other doctors wants to know, other schemes. Now, MedScheme can have a look, or not MedScheme, the scheme administered by MedScheme can look at what happens at Discovery or Polmed or GEMS for that instance. So benchmarks, of course, it's good, better or best, but that's your own choice. And if we look at the pros and cons, I think the pros are a lot better than the cons. You know, you've got to understand it. It's got to balance out. At the end of the day, I guess, you might not like the answer. But that can never, if you don't like it, outweigh the advantages of knowing what happens in your business, your discipline, and your industry. You know, so we moved away from that. And who manages the practice, very important. So if we look at the components of a practice, the personnel costs, so these are the line items that we're going to ask in the survey. So we're going to send survey forms to Nppf just to have a look if that makes sense in your environment. It's not going to be different from what we used previously. It can't be different because costs are costs. The one that will be different in the equipment environment will be in ophthalmology, where they've got different structures, you know, and equipment really drives that profession to a large extent. You'll get that, the average per doctor, where it's multiple doctors, and then the average per practice. Then we will go to the practice management items, which includes all the admin, finance, auditing, IT cost, communication cost, printing, transport, everything. We will go to the financing costs, which will also include your malpractice insurance, which is very expensive. So the one which is, of course, the worst is the obs and gynae, that in South Africa they pay, if you do a lot of obs and gynae, a lot of deliveries, and there's only two codes for it, 2614 and 2615, R1 million. So what we did probably about 7 years back in the malpractice insurance, we got together with all the schemes at the offices of Investec, and we explained it to them, and it more than doubled our obstetric fee, 2614 and 2615, and all the schemes paid it. You know, they never had a dispute. Now we have multiple insurers, so MPS doesn't dominate the market anymore, but they tend to follow, why will you be cheaper than your competitor? You know, so quite important. Then the indirect materials that you use, and that's the code 0200 and 0201. Ophthalmology, once again, issue. What they did in South Africa is that they limit the CMS and what they publish to a maximum markup on intraocular lens to 59 Rand, you know, which is not fair, you know, for something that costs a few thousand. So we have now come to an agreement with Discovery, where for all the administered schemes, we have what we call a transfer fee. So you have a 0201 plus a TFEE, and for that every year we negotiate a price which is about 1,900 Rand per lens. And that's negotiations, you know, that's the goodwill and so on. And all the schemes now start to do that as well, so that's important. And then you look at all the other expenses that comes through the practice. Equipment cost, I don't want to go through the mechanics of it, but it's very expensive. And there must be a model upon which you base it. So you've got to differentiate between office equipment, your computers, your furniture, and all of that. And then in ophthalmology, we've got a basic equipment. So those are all the high-tech stuff that you have in an ophthalmology practice that actually doesn't have a charge code. And we've all slotted that under code 3009, which is a basic equipment fee, which the schemes refused to pay for about 3-4 years. And each and every ophthalmologist just kept on charging it. And I think that's a lesson. If schemes don't want to pay, keep on charging it. Ultimately, they will give way. And they have done that now in 3009, even though it's only about 200-300 Rand, is in ophthalmology probably the 5th or 6th highest income in an ophthalmology practice now, which previously didn't happen, and that's why it works quite well. Specialized equipment, that's an itemized fee code. You've got to work out what the costs are, you know, and we'll have a look at those costs. And that, just remember, the tariff there excludes the professional time usually, except where it's something where the doctor is very involved. If you have a technician that's involved with it, let's say in the radiology it would be a sonographer or a radiographer, then you add it to the fee. So we look at the capital cost, the depreciation, and we use 5 years, even though you could keep equipment 10, 20 years. The acceptable norm is 5 years. You must have a return on investment. You do not spend R1 million on something if you don't have a return on investment, and that would be the current market rate, the banker's acceptance, plus about 2 or 3%. We've got to look at the maintenance, your insurance, rental, and specialized labor. That ultimately looks at it, the capital cost, what it costs, excludes VAT, the depreciation also excludes VAT, and the periods can vary between 3 and 10 years, but the schemes will allow us 5 years, you know, so even if you write it off over 3 years, IT stuff you write off over 3 years, because it doesn't last, so you can extend it as well, and that would be a number there. We've done it and we'll send that to you. This is exactly how it will work. That's what it costs. We work out the depreciation, return on investment, the maintenance at a fixed percentage, and ultimately we come up with a fee. So the total cost is taken, the 500,000. We will work at the utilization, and that's why it's important to have data on your practices. How many times is a code used? Now, if you're in that practice that only uses it once or twice, you're going to lose out. But then you shouldn't have bought it in any case. You know, so it's something that you use now. The one that we're going to look at now in the new year is ultrasound. Ultrasounds are very expensive and it's a high utilization in the obs and gynae, and I assume in the GP practices as well. So we've got a society, SASUOG, South African Society of Ultrasound in Obstetrics, you know, because it's mostly in our environment, obstetrics. And that's how you get to a tariff. What we need to understand, we don't have regional differences in South Africa because the schemes don't allow it, but we want to understand where the costs vary at least. So I've just slotted in areas, so you can slot in your own areas, and it can be towns or regions and so on. That's quite important. Ultimately, we will look at the distribution of overall of the practice costs and try and get a median for the discipline, and that's the one right in the middle. That's a median. You'll have very expensive oaks on the right, you'll have cheapos on the left, you know, but hopefully the patient doesn't go to the cheapo, or it's all old equipment. And then we look, how does it differ per discipline as well? It's very important to understand that. So obviously ophthalmology is right at the top, the most expensive practices to run, and then we also do it all consulting disciplines and all surgical disciplines. Now we can also do all GP practices, which in your case will be a lot different from South Africa. Value-based alternatives, that's we've been asked to talk what's currently happening. Everybody's going to look at value-add, value-based product and alternative reimbursement. So in South Africa, we have capitation contracts, optometry and GPs, where you capitate it per life. So in optometry, for especially Discovery, the cheap option, we have a cap fee, and that might be, let's say, 17 Rand per life that you capitate. Then you've got to look at the average age and the risk, because if you're over 40, the chances of having spectacles is great. I'm not going to give my age, but it's over 60, and I wear Dis-Chem specs, but I'm fortunate, you know, it's lucky that's not good business for an optom. But I did have one cataract, so that does help, I guess. Open networks as an alternative, full administration. Then we have the global fees in ophthalmology, as I've said. And what upsets the anaesthetist is our global fee for cataract surgery includes the specialist, the material, the hospital, which upsets the hospitals, of course, the eye clinics, and it includes the anaesthetist. You know, so one fee, and the claim gets paid to the ophthalmologist. The ophthalmologist has to pay. So it's extra admin, and it does upset people, but nonetheless it does work. Discovery and ProfMed are now also coming out with capped fees, where they just come out and say cataract surgery is 28,000 Rand. The doctor can charge, and we'll deal with the anaesthetist and the materials and the hospital. But that's going to be tough. It's a 2025 initiative. We'll see if it works. ProfMed has been on capitation for many years, and they actually cancelled the global fee contract. But they're going to come short, but that's fine. Governance projects that we have with Discovery Health, especially in pediatrics. So where they look at the outcomes of certain work that the pediatrician does and what it costs. If it works well, the pediatrician gets paid more. And that's been around enhanced remuneration for pediatrics in governance Discovery probably 10 years as well. So you will find the less sophisticated schemes just don't do it. GEMS don't do it. GEMS has 3 options and we work well with them. And just to put GEMS in perspective, we have a very good relation with GEMS. You might not with CMAS, but we see them. They come and see us in the office every quarter. Just ask us, what operational problems do you have with GEMS as a scheme? And we tell them they don't use their administrator for that. They say, no, the administrator might tell a different story. We want to hear it. And that works quite well. So the governance projects, now with the general surgeons, we're starting with a short stay in hospital project. That hasn't kicked off yet because it hasn't been defined. So the shorter you stay, the more the doctor gets paid. Is it good for the patient or not? I'm not a doctor. I'm an accountant, I would say good. But it's actually not good for the patient, I would guess. The GPs, the less referrals, the more they get paid. But in Namibia, that won't work. So those are the initiatives, and I'm sure next year, this time, there will be new initiatives as it sort of gets put in place. Private practice input into the influence, with the way forward for 25 and 6, it's very important that private practice has input into and influence the regulators. A bit easier for us, I think it's very difficult here, but what I've heard from Eben and Nppf is that you're doing a lot of work in that area. You need to understand the practice costing. You need to get access to scheme revenue and claims data. You need to understand the administrator costing data that we have. We receive that. Discipline and practice coding utilization. How often is a code used? That we're currently going to use discovery data and switching data. So the MediSwitch data important, and we have got an agreement with the company in South Africa, and hopefully it comes through here. The impact study and the data project is something that we've got to tackle here. And the ancillary group, we have to do a bit later. In South Africa as well, we do get that data and we do publish it, but it's not used very effectively. And I guess if one looks at the industry, and because of the amount of money involved, it's a rough road ahead. But in Joburg, it's a rough road in any case because we're the pothole capital. Very close to me, I've got a pothole that's about 3 meters in length and about 2 meters deep. And you think that it's been there for 2 years. Everybody understands it now, they drive around it. But someday someone's going to drive through it and there's going to be a death. And Joburg has got potholes, and they get a clean audit from the Auditor General, which we do not understand. Thank you. And I'm sure I've exceeded my time, but there's a lot of stuff to go through, and you can ask me questions afterwards as well. You can ask questions now, but I'm sure we've run out of time as well. Thank you, always very interesting, and it's a dynamic industry, and I guess that's why we fussbait, we hang in, and the doctors actually hang in as well, And sorry, my last stupid comment is what the minister said 2 weeks back. If the doctors don't get jobs in the public sector, just go to the private sector or immigrate. To tell our doctors to immigrate is quite irresponsible. It's stupid, and we've had the same minister for a long time. Thank you very much. No question.
We will do questions in 5 minutes.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Benter. That was an information-packed talk, and I think we're all thinking about all the information, and it's resonated with us, and I think we all needed to hear everything you had to say. We will have questions in about 5 to 10 minutes, 5 to 7 minutes. Before that, I would just like to extend our heartfelt thanks to our sponsors and everyone who contributed to making this event a success. Our sponsors were Point Break, Olympia Eye Center, Patmos Clinic in Keetmanshoop, Windhoek Eye Center, MediSwitch, and an individual sponsor, Dr. Darlene DeLange, Dr. Rudy van Vieren and Nankuze for sponsoring this venue. I would also like to thank our catering at the Rooster by Mr. Barty Becker, and thank you to Mr. Hans Stradom from JC for our audiovisual IT and streaming, which has been seamless. I would also like to extend my gratitude to the rest of the Nppf Board of Directors, especially Dr. Sophia van Rooyen. Sophia is one of the most knowledgeable clinicians when it comes to the history of the private healthcare sector in our country and the various stakeholders within it. She dedicates much of her time to engaging across different platforms to advance our industry. Additionally, I would like to thank Mr. Eben de Klerk, who has served as a legal advisor to Nppf for over a decade. His expertise is invaluable, and he has always been willing to share his insights and provide unwavering support. There is one more individual whose selfless and tireless dedication I wish to acknowledge. Her positive energy, insight, technical know-how, and overall time and support made this event not only possible, but a true success. Personally, it was an absolute pleasure working with her. On behalf of Nppf, I would like to thank you, Corné, and I would ask the audience to please give a round of applause to Ms. Corné van Wyk. And Corné, please come to the front. We have a small token of appreciation. If you can please come to the front. I know you didn't want to. For everything that you've done for us. And yes, thank you. It was a pleasure working with you.
I hope it works.
We now welcome Lensha van Dijk from MediSwitch. She will be giving us a briefing on their product and company services.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for all the patrons of Namibia, especially in the healthcare industry. I really didn't want to take away from the excellent presentation that Mr. Venter presented. So I've asked Corné if she can maybe open up the floor for me to have a Q&A from this forum. And I know quite a few of the clients of MediSwitch are sitting in this forum. So I want to extend this invitation to my clients of MediSwitch to just give their input of how MediSwitch have worked. Because I've always believed that besides of marketing our services, word of mouth is very important in Namibia. And then as well as the aftermarket service, not just selling a product, but is to provide the support afterwards that makes the difference in Namibia for us, and to build that relationship, that personal relationship with each and every client of ours. So is there anyone that do not understand what MediSwitch does in Namibia? Okay. Just to explain to everyone, we are actually the middleman, the post office between your office and the administrators. We deliver the transactions in real time to all the administrators in Namibia, which makes it easier for you to make sure that if there are risks, for example, of a member that has a benefit that depleted, you will immediately know and have that option to immediately have that discussion with the patient, saying that unfortunately your benefit have been depleted. So it takes away the risk of the practice. And besides that, all of the responses that we provide back to you, if there are no complications that the medical industry, your administrators pick up, it's a given that you will get that money. So for our clients at the administrative, the funds section, we work extremely well with NMC, with CMAS, yes, CMAS is included, with NHP, NAMET, you've got Renaissance, RMA, Gem Health, Napatel. We work with each and every one. We've got an open relationship with each and every one, the funders, the claims managers, all the contacts that you are fighting with. We have got a very open relationship with them, and they are very open and very lenient in having that discussion to see where the problem is, and together we resolve the problem for future. One of the other key benefits that we have is that we travel to your practice free of charge. We provide training, like your practice managers. We provide them a 2-week process where we sit with them every single day. We provide them the initial training, and then do a follow-up for at least 2 months to ensure that your practice manager, along with all of the staff, are aware of what they need to do if the response gets back, what actions need to be taken, and who to phone when there are problems. So we provide 24/7 service. Over weekends, you can phone us. We've got telephone numbers. We've got cell phone numbers. We've even got a toll-free number. But nobody uses this anymore. Everyone just phones on the cell phone. So basically is we see and we make sure that you get your payments faster. And in the process, we also take up some of the responsibilities of if you've got a problem with your software. You don't have to phone to South Africa or phone this side and they don't answer. We uptake that responsibility, and because we've got the affiliations with them. So this is where we take the responsibility away from your admin staff and onboard that responsibility onto MediSwitch. And I am sure that Corneille can actually confirm. She's been begging us for quite some time with her specialist practice to move over to the switching because we've done her optometry practice. And Mr. Dr. Mansveld is here. He's been our testing pilot site for more than 15 years. Where whenever we've got an issue, we bring him in and we take him under advisement. So if there are any questions from this forum, I would like to take the opportunity for you to ask. And as I've heard, sorry. No, we are not expensive. All the free things that we provide, we will never onboard an invoice to you. So the service that you get, you will never get a surprise invoice from MediSwitch. There were a couple of my clients that, because each and every practice differs with their billing structure, and we have to pull the structures back and give them guidance and train the people how to do that. In that process, we forsake our fee until the practice is at the point where they understand how the process works. They see the benefit on their H analysis. And we make sure after that, once we do sign contracts with our clients, that contract is gone through with due diligence. Because the majority of our health professionals just signs. They don't see what's going on. So we actually stipulate and include in our communication that you only need to provide us a cancellation of 1 month. I'm not going to hold you hostage. If you want to move out, it's fine with us. We will put your system back as whatever you, how we received it. If you want to move back to EDI and hard copies, it's your preference. But in our 20-odd years of operating in Namibia, the clients that we've lost, sadly, passed away. So I am a firm believer, and our whole company is a firm believer of making sure that after service meets your expectations. Is there any questions from this forum for me? How do you mean medical aid only? Yeah, because we deliver the claim to the medical aid. Cash patients, unfortunately, they pay cash at your practice.
But then they pay cash, and then they have to sort the claim out with their medical aid themselves.
Yes, that's what we are trying to accomplish in Namibia.
Yes, that's what I'm doing. So I wouldn't need MediSwitch for that. Yes or no?
No, you don't. You won't need me.
See.
But it becomes a burden for the member. Yes, we do.
Oh, okay.
Yes. Okay, if there is anything else, we will leave our business cards at the back. Both me and my colleague Alton, we are readily available if you need to phone us. We will come and sit at the practice, and we will deal with the practice themselves. That's in general what we do. I despise having team sessions with my clients. I would much rather just climb into my car and go to my practices and see what the problem is. And a majority, we get things quicker resolved, and then we drink a cup of coffee afterwards. Okay. Thank you.
We now have a few minutes for any questions that may be coming from the floor. There are some online questions from our online viewers. If there is anyone who has any question that they would like to direct to Healthman, to Mr. Venter, or to Dr. Jürgen Hoffman, or to Lensha, you're welcome. Maybe we can do the question that is okay. So the speaker, Mr. Venter, stated that ICD-10 codes are not important in SA, although they are on the accounts. We'll appreciate more validation on this comment. And I think it stems from our, in our private sector, which we have been, ICD-10 has been pushed, and it was supposed to be that ICD-10 coding had to be put on any claim before the claim will be accepted. This has now been shifted till June 2025. I don't know if you can maybe address this.
Okay, thanks for that. So we've had ICD-10 for a number of years, and it is on the account and it is switched. Of course, you can also have multiple ICD-10 situations on a claim where it's 3 or 4. The practice management systems and switching becomes a bit more difficult on that. But I must be honest, we've had, so you're going to do it, the ICD-10 manuals are there, you can get it, just add it, the doctor would know what it is. But the queries are, we don't get queries from schemes or administrators about a practice using inappropriate ICD-10, because it's very much a clinical decision. So we don't get it, and we're now going to look at ICD-11, and everybody is looking, the funders and regulators in our environment also now looking at ICHI, international class. So that will be a greater mess, because it only deals with certain procedures and not everything that a doctor does. You know, so ICD-10 implementation, not difficult. The switching houses can manage it. I'm not sure about your practice management software, but the switching houses do, but the multiple ones are problematic, and doctor would use one or two, and that's it. Can I just give some other two other comments? Now, what we have done, and I've written to SAMA today, and just ask them who actually has access to the SAMA medical doctors coding manual in Namibia, and under what conditions do they have it, and can we actually provide it to the doctors in Namibia? It costs 2,000 Rand for the manual, but you can have it electronic or a hard copy, and I'm sure that will be successful. Then you have a full access to the medical doctor's coding, because why it's refused, I have no idea. Is it the old version? Probably. It's not been updated, because in South Africa it's updated annually. And then just the last thing that we now have in the system, which you'll get once we've done our work, we can now list all the codes. And our IT manager called it that. So if you click on a code, it opens up a menu, and that tells you exactly how many practices and which disciplines actually use that code. And that's actually quite nice in the fraud, waste and abuse scenarios as well. So technology allows us to do a lot of things now, and once we get the switching stuff, it's going to be even more, and you will not be at the mercy of anyone. Thanks.
Question from Hein?
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Hein Venter. I'm from Paramount Healthcare. Thank you very much for the invite. I really enjoyed tonight. The question perhaps directed to Dr. Hoffman, Jürgen Hoffman, and or Eben, and that pertains to, but before I ask the question, or refer to the question, it seems that from a Namibian perspective, there's an onslaught towards us within the industry, whether you're not an administrator, but whether you're an HCP, a healthcare provider, or whether you're an institution which hosts healthcare providers, for example, Paramount Healthcare or Mediclinic or Lady Palmer, or whatever the case may be. And the onslaught comes from two sides. One, Nppf, from a regulatory perspective, especially when I look at the over-regulation that's on the cards, and that Kali Schaefer knows very much all about. But then there's another onslaught, probably aimed against us all. And we've seen that on 28 November 2023, when we only received a letter of a zero increase. And that's when all, pardon my language, hell broke loose. Then we realized that in 2024 we should continue charging 23 rates. Now it was thrown was put in the wheelbarrow of COVID expenses, etc., etc. So that's the one thing. The whole unilateral decision from NAMAF per se in not allowing any increase. Number two, I've read the correspondence by Dr. Hoffman pertaining to what seems to be an onslaught regarding, firstly, the rate increase, secondly, the ICD-10 compulsory implementation of the ICD-10 coding in June, July 2025, as well as the overriding of certain codes where, for example, code 0201, and I don't know if in the South African environment that's the same, where, for example, a GP drawing blood or is forced to draw blood and not charge for it whilst or during the consultation. it seems that more and more NAMAF is coming to the fore in regulating, because they give themselves out as the regulator of the industry, which I do not agree with. My question to Dr. Hoffman, and I've read many of the letters that you've written to Eric Garisep or Matamola and Stephen Choro. Is there any progress on those matters? Have you engaged, since your letters, have you engaged with them? One other item I can think of now is the many years that we have been paying practice NAMAF fees, which was found to be ultra vires. Now, the question I think amongst the audience, has there been any progress on the one hand? And number two, Quo Vadis, where do we move to from tonight? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Venter. Yeah, I think you raised a couple of very important points, and I think you sum up very nicely the frustration of not only the funders and the administrators, but especially also the practitioners. And I think that's what I allude to in having clinical decisions overruled because of directives that come from NAMAF to the administrators. It seems that there's some kind of compulsory nature to certain kind of advice that is provided. And I think that is what NPPF tried to question, to raise for the last 12 years, the ultra vires actions of NAMAF, which essentially is a regulator of medical aid funds. And you know, there's a Section 18, which you are aware, which NAMAF never implemented, which regulates behavior of the funds. I don't say that the funds do not misbehave, and sometimes they do. And there's no recourse for anybody, not for the patient or the practitioner involved, to achieve anything tangible out of that. And as you correctly observe, there's an increase. There's a kind of staggering of kind of overreaches that comes to a point where it's not about necessarily the ICD-10 per se, but it's about the principle that's involved in dictating terms to the medical aid funds. And that is where we had some kind of heavy fights with NAMFISA on that point, that we asked them, why can you actually in any way approve fund rules where the fund didn't have the authority in the first place to establish rules like that. In the second place, it's not the fund that established the rules, but it was basically transferred from NAMAF on a direction basis that should be basically implemented. And then again, I alluded to that before. That's in the name of fighting fraud, waste, and abuse. And I think that's a firm conviction of NAMFISA. And yeah, we definitely had about 6 kind of letters. Not all of them have been actually published. And we went now to the point that on the ultra vires fees that they charged, we got a response from them. I think it was Friday last week, where they said that they are not interested in engaging with NPPF for the simple reason that NPPF is not covered within the Medical Aid Fund Act, and as such there is no recourse to mention these factors, and there's also no inclination from NAMAF to attend to that claims. And we refer to $5.95 million that were extracted from all of us that are sitting in this room here for the years 2021, 22, and 23, so only those 3 years. So our response was basically that we informed them that we just want to advise that they themselves basically have no mandate according to the MAF Act in order to raise these fees in the first place. In the second way, we basically go back to the Article 95K in the Constitution, where there is a possibility for institutions representing members or masses of the public to bring these matters in front of the kind of responsible bodies. In that case, it would have been the Ministry of Finance and the Ministry of Health, and Namibia in that sense as well, because they're a regulator of the funds. So we laid a formal complaint against NAMAF on that issues, and we also advised that NAMAF should be, in a sense, based on those ultra-virus actions, be declared as an institution not worthy fulfilling a statutory role. So that's I express it in a little different ways, and that basically the underlying need that is a medical control board where the stakeholders sit together without a third party trying to influence, also in a way pushing their own agendas, which is not always clear to us, but that the medical control board should be established where there is a control, or there's a representation of practitioners, funders, administrators, and maybe also representative associations of members. And we had also dealings with the Minister of Health on more the HPCNA related foreigner fees, which we found also in a way disappropriate. So they try to say us it's a common case, but we say it's not a common case to increase those fees for 400%. So on what basis did they establish that? They cannot tell us. And the underlying understanding that we seem to get from Nppf is that there is an appreciation for the fact that the things as they are at the moment need to have some revamp, have to some statutory kind of redress, and the possibility of moving to a medical control board is definitely on the cards. It's not. Of course, I cannot say when that will be, because an Nppf raised that matter 10 years ago. So, but we try to raise awareness about NAMAF on various issues. So the fees are one. The ICD-10, we also said we already informed them in 2019 that ICD-11 is coming. So there's no point in establishing now a kind of infrastructure and wasting a lot of money on training and implementing these things where there's no proof, there's no proof in the first place that it will basically achieve what they deem to be necessary. And I think this notion in selling that the ICD-10 will solve all the problems that are basically there is a widespread kind of acceptance, or there's acceptance of that principle. And we try to change the perceptions. And, Mr. Venter, as changing perceptions is something that takes time. And it takes persistence. And I think we were persistent. So we got, you probably, when you followed all the correspondence, saw that we didn't take no for an answer. So we tackled them again and again and again. And I think this is basically what we hopefully, at the end of the day, achieve, that we can, similar to the system that Mr. Venter addressed now, come to that point where we can agree on certain matters on the sustainability of all involved, and not pushing matters to the point. And you mentioned the 0%, and I think that is something that's not going well with the patients as well, or the members. Because automatically, there's no responsibility we all are, we saw the practice cost situation. So you need to have a certain kind of buffer built into that in terms of increases. And if that increases is suddenly zero and the patient has to pay 9.99%, then above a certain amount that has not been necessarily budgeted for, because there's also no communication to anybody, so it's just announced. It's just the way it is now, and that under that circumstances, people are disgruntled, and we need to reach to a point where there is more influx into the medical aid schemes of younger people in order to make things meet at the end of the day. And with that kind of practice, we're actually achieving the complete opposite. And so, yeah, I think we are at it. We are pretty much aware that whatever system we implement here needs to have a judicial or basically a political base behind that. We have to have the legislation behind us, and we definitely work full steam in establishing that kind of establishing the legislative framework for what we want to achieve. I hope I answered your question.
It's now almost 8 o'clock. We're coming to the end of our symposium. I would like to just thank everyone who participated in making this event a success. Your presence and contributions are truly appreciated. I would also just like to make mention of the fact that Dr. Jürgen Hoffmann, he has suffered a loss an hour before the meeting. His beloved father passed away in a frail care in Windhoek, and he called me, and he had to put the strengths together, and he has joined us, and it's just a testament to his resilience, his wisdom, and his care, and we do offer our heartfelt condolences. I would like to encourage you all, to please visit the Nppf website. We launched it at the end of December. We are excited about it. You can get more information there about our initiatives and ongoing efforts, as well as you can inform yourselves through our resource section. All of the documents, all of the work that Eben and Dries worked on over the years since 2012 will be on there. And if you haven't already, please consider to join Nppf as a member. And when this meeting ends, it's not the end, it's really just the start of a process. We need to formalize our partnership with HealthMan. We need to answer surveys that they are going to be sending us. We implore our healthcare professionals, all the allied healthcare professionals, our doctors, our specialists, to engage and inform themselves, and that we can actually move forward in this transformation. Thank you very much.